All right, everyone. Everybody hear me? Yeah, it's usually not a problem. First of all, before we get started, I want to remind everybody that you can submit questions like you did yesterday, for those of you that were here, to modernconflict@vanderbilt.edu. We will certainly, in our discussion, take a few of those. Congressman, it's like you said, it's always a pleasure to have you on our campus, and for you represent our campus. You are our advocate in D.C. You made. We talked a lot, had a lot of industry leaders that talked a lot about artificial intelligence and its role in this process. You gave us a compelling kind of description of where we are, some of the concerns that you have in the area of responsibility. So we've got this clear level of competition. You made it absolutely clear in your address. It's multidimensional in many ways. So you've made a compelling argument that we're not ready, that we're behind, that there's some things that we need to do. So, digging a little deeper on that process, what in your seat in Congress and from a policy standpoint with artificial intelligence in mind, how can we catch up? How can we be more competitive? How can we regain maybe an edge that we don't have right now? You talked about synthesizing and harmonizing a lot of our efforts. Where does AI play into that? And what would be some of the next steps from your standpoint that Congress might want to take or need to take?
Well, that's a very broad question. Nathan, I would expect nothing less from you. It's a lot like the 12-step program, part of your question. The first step to fixing an issue is to know you have a problem. And I think we're still in the phase of educating Americans that, even in some of our biggest multinational corporations, that China has nefarious intent. And you don't have to convince the folks in the Philippines or in Vietnam. But unfortunately, there are a lot of Americans who don't. So to get to that particular issue, we have legislation that tries to prevent technology from going to China. But DeepSeek scared everybody to death, right? About chips and all of that stuff. Josh Hawley and I have a bill that would require a licensure. It's another step to make sure that technology doesn't get over to China. We have to protect our intellectual property. And so I guess recognizing the problem is something that's really important. In terms of AI, we just have to beat them. And we will. I think we're ahead. You mentioned that I implied that we're behind. I think we're behind in some areas, but we're ahead in some areas. In AI, we're still ahead. Despite what you see with DeepSeek, we're still ahead. But there's a lot of places where we are not, and we just need you guys to do what you're doing, innovate in the lab. But you also, we also have to recognize the problems there. A lot of people, Americans look at World War I. We're isolationists, right? We don't want to go to World War II. It took us all the way to being attacked ourselves. This debate about what's happening in Ukraine, it's in our country, it's divided our country. It's because we're not the bully in the world, and we don't like the fact that there's a conflict going on. And so it's hard to convince us sometimes, if you look through our history, that there's a bad guy out there. But there are bad guys out there. And we need people standing watch on that border and in the cyber border that could very well be a machine. And not even probably, it has to be a machine. Because to defend against the AI attack, you need an AI defense. And so AI's a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, and as usual, you gave a very concise answer. So This is going to go like our usual, most of our conversations in DC
exactly.
go here. I'm thinking of an ask here while I've got you on stage. I haven't quite, I've got so many congressmen.
Well, it is
so
reconciliation. I mean, everybody else is coming up to the.
Well, now that you mention it, that's for the walk when we leave. You know, one question that I frankly wasn't thinking about possibly asking you, but based upon your comments and so forth, I think could really resonate with the group is, does Homeland Security extend into space? And, you know, should we be doing stuff to protect our critical infrastructure, you know, in orbit? You know, I mean, we've got a Space Force now and all that. Where does Congress, where are policymakers going with that?
It's interesting you asked that. We just recently caught a Chinese national fleeing the country after flying a drone over one of our space bases. So the answer is yes. The Department of Homeland Security, you know, right now I have a bill, an anti-drone bill, basically that would empower local law enforcement. You got a Vanderbilt stadium here, right? Imagine a drone and a terrorist. But local law enforcement doesn't have the authority to take down that drone. It's the same with, you know, these incidences of, you know, it happened at a space base, and of course DOD has its own authorities, but we've got to address that issue. But yes, absolutely, there's a piece to play. I mean, I don't, you know, not out at a satellite somewhere, but in the controlling mechanisms of those satellites. One of the things we recently had a classified briefing on, so I have to be a little bit careful here, but I'll say what's in the open source information. Bitcoin mining is a massive drain on our power. And if you build a big enough, you know, Bitcoin mining site, you can actually put the grid in that area at risk. Well, guess what? Some Chinese-backed companies have done, built massive Bitcoin farms right next to our nuclear silos and right next to space command places. So your question was, does Homeland Security have a role all the way out there? Well, not on the satellite, but clearly protecting the systems that are out there that we're using to defend our country.
You know, we saw a report maybe earlier in the month. Secretary Wright was at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and spoke about these AI data centers that he would like to create at the maybe at each national laboratory. You know, the administration clearly sees a benefit there. What are your thoughts about what, you know, the secretary mentioned and about how Congress can be a partner with the administration, you know, and tying these to the national labs that we have across the country?
Well, AI advances our ability to, I mean, it does advance our ability to reason and to think. And, you know, when you marry it with an innovative human scientist or mind, it is synergistic. You know, it's that old saying about the sum and the parts, right? So I think Congress obviously can authorize these things, pay for these things, and make sure that they're happening. But with AI, we can also make sure that the dangers of AI are protected against. And I loved my West Point classmates. Mark Esper was my West Point classmate, Secretary of Defense. And he came up with I think the first time the DOD came up with a policy on AI. And his principles, and I can't recite them, but I'd encourage people to look at them on how we control and regulate, and I hate that word even though I'm in Congress, AI and make sure that the bad things don't happen. But Congress can play a role in that.
We had like a bipartisan task force that looked into this and made some recommendations to the speaker and the minority leader. We haven't reconstituted that task force in the 119th. Is there plans for Congress when considering things like AI and, you know, that dreaded word regulation, that maybe this would be either very similar to a bipartisan task force or better coordination between your committee and other relevant committees?
Well, one of the things that I've done is, it's the nodes in between, the silos, that are now the big threat. And so when I came in to become the chairman of Homeland, I created what I call the Cyber Subs Committee, because not only is our federal government siloed, our institutions siloed, our businesses siloed, the Congress is siloed. And each committee has its own sort of subcommittee, if you will, on cybersecurity. So the Energy and Commerce Committee has a cybersecurity. DOD has a cybersecurity. And they weren't talking to one another. And so I started this quarterly meeting of all the cyber subs. And honestly, that's where we got the solution for the workforce shortage. Now those cyber subs meetings are focused on harmonization. But we have to think of this as a whole of government. So your question about, is there a caucus or is there a leader who's bringing it on? I think that Cyber Subs Committee can be a vehicle for that, specific to AI, at least from an AI defense standpoint. But what you referred to right now, we're focused on the budget and reconciliation, and there is some cyber and AI stuff in that reconciliation. But I think having a get together of what the group you're talking about isn't going to happen for probably 2 more months.
You've given speeches before, and I know you've actually articulated this to some degree, and we hear this a lot from General Nakasone, the need going forward for policymakers to know how to write code and for code to better understand the perspective of policymakers.
I got to learn how to write code?
Well, I'm not advocating that every member of Congress go to computer science classes, even though we are creating a new school and be glad to work something out here at Vanderbilt University. But talk about why that's important and how in your role you've seen that perspective really matters.
So absolutely, every job I've ever done, you have to have, to be a leader, you have to have a degree of competency. Okay, you just do. That's why, actually, I'm thinking about, well, maybe Chancellor, you can put this together and I'll do it here. But there's an 8-week short course master's program at MIT on AI for business leaders that I'd hoped to take last fall. But life didn't allow it. So sometime this year, but this is how you can take politicians. Like I did several of these with LSE, London School of Economics. I'll just take night classes on, the political economy, or I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who died with a how-to book on his chest. If you stop being a learner, it's a lot, and I forget, maybe it was Ray Kroc who said, if you stop learning, you're like that grape, you're ripening, you're green, you stop learning, you start to rot. So I think some kind of 6 or 8, you guys have, I did your financial, back when I was running my business, you guys have a master's level, 6-week, 8-week class on that. My undergrad degree's economics, and, don't ask an economist to run a business. That was intended to be a joke. But no, seriously, something like that on AI, and I bet you get state legislators come into that. I bet you get businesses come into that. How can they leverage AI in their business? And then we get to understand it, right, a little better. But,
We've gotten some great questions from the audience, so I'd like to dig in a little bit here, if you don't mind, Chairman. And a lot of it's in response to your compelling comments that you made earlier. One question is, can you expand on cryptocurrency, how cryptocurrency is an apparent enabler of nefarious behavior?
Well, decentralized can obviously be used, decentralized currency on the blockchain. You can have it either centralized or decentralized. Decentralized can be used just like cash. It's hard to regulate. So yeah, whether it's terrorist financing or illegal behavior. However, I would submit to you that a centralized digital currency scares me more. And the reason a centralized digital currency scares me more is because it can have smart contracts that are built into it that dictate your behavior. And that cannot be tolerated. That's a loss of freedom, despite the fact that Ripple's built the digital dollar and it's ready to go. But the decentralized can be used just like cash, just like gold, just like rare coins that are worth $5 million and drop in your pocket and you can leave the country. I get it. But what scares me more is centralized digital currency where the government can tell me, no, Green, Tennessee's bought too much diesel, take your F-250 home. Believe me, that could happen. Or Green, you bought too much ammo this month. Freedom, centralized digital currency, freedom's gone, or could be.
Congressman, we've had several questions regarding, your description of the world, of where we are, and the importance of allies. So in the next 5 years, what countries do you see as allies that we need to cultivate?
Cultivate. Well, when I was running,
or maybe even retain or strengthen.
Yeah, I was about to address that issue. When I was running my business, we used to have my company. I used to have a thing I would tell my people: our best customer is the one we have right now. And so, look at who helped us respond to the Houthis. There were just a few nations that were in the Red Sea firing missiles and flying jets and bombing them when they were launching missiles at shipping in the Red Sea and redirecting the entire supply chain around the south of Africa. It was England, Great Britain. And obviously that is probably our number one alliance. And it's fascinating. We got into a little kerfuffle there at the beginning of our relationship with England, if you'll recall. But since that time, the blood of our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines has been together on battlefield after battlefield. And I will tell you a personal story. I was a part of a Tier 1 task force, and we did a joint mission Halloween 2003 with the British SAS. I was the casualty evacuation aircraft, and as the ER physician in that aircraft, I'm there to help when it goes south. And the Brits were hitting a part of the target, and the bad guys blew a charge after the breach charge. So these guys breach the door, they go in, and a charge goes off, and 4 of them go down. And I get called in. She mentioned the air medal with a V device. That's where that came from. So we fly into the target, and we pull 4 British guys who are there because we got attacked, Nathan, onto our aircraft. And I lost one of them. But alliances matter. And we cannot forget our friends. And that one is number one. Now, NATO and all the others that have been traditional alliances are critical to the security of this country in a bipolar world. That unipolar moment, very unique in history, is gone, and now we sit and people are aligning, and we need our alliances. When you think of a nation with, if their per capita GDP equals ours, at some point, their economy will be 4 or 5 times the size of ours. Alliances are critical. We're losing Latin America. I mean, the election in Honduras and the loss of the recognition of Taiwan by that country, I think we're down to like 7 nations that are with us with Taiwan. Latin America is very concerning. Recent success in Argentina, very good. But Brazil is disintegrating, one of the largest economies in the world. And so I think Latin America, the Caribbean, very critical. China is influencing the Caribbean nations. And we have to be careful of some of the policy decisions we make that trickle down on, for example, on tariffs on shipping and things like that. impact the cost of goods in those countries too. See, so it's hard to make friends when you're creating an inflationary situation in a neighboring country.
So is there a risk maybe that as the president's looking at these trade imbalances and so forth, that there's a tariff policy that could result in allies of ours becoming more of a trading partner with China and changing that paradigm? Is that what your possible suggestion might be? You think that's a possibility?
I thought we weren't going out on the thin ice. But I did kind of tee it up a little bit. But look, you know, fair trade should happen. And it is a true statement to say that the United States, you take Airbus and Boeing, for example. They're protectionist and have been. And Boeing is, when Boeing reports its economic data, you actually see a GDP move on for the United States of America. Yet they can't compete fairly in the world. That's unacceptable. So look, what's driving this is important and critical, right? We have to address this issue. But we have to be aware of the complexities of it, the trickle-down effects on friends, and we need to make sure we have a plan for that. How's that?
Yeah, sounds great. I
Thanks.
just want to remind the congressman that I'm also on the stage, so this is a fellowship here
I got you, man.
we're engaged with here quite a bit. Yesterday, there were several references by a lot of people dealing with, the concerns of AI, and in many ways they reference what you said, and that is that the United States is achieving great success with AI, is far advanced than some other countries may be. But the concern is that our military has elements of foreign technology through the supply chain elements, and that supply chain kept coming up in a lot of our conversations.
So it's not just the military, but yes.
Yeah, and it's just not the military.
You take what's in my lane, right? It's our port cranes. And we did an investigation into what's going on in the port cranes. And we found that China, the company building these, had a modem and a way to communicate with images what's happening at our ports back to China. So they didn't even need a spy balloon. They got it at every port crane, right? So we have a bill that basically says you got to fix this issue. Think about if we were to choose to defend Taiwan, we would have to move military equipment over railheads, over barges to the sea to get on boats in a port. Well, it's nothing like having the intel of knowing exactly what your enemy is bringing to the table. Yet somehow we were, again, asleep at the wheel, and we bought port cranes with Chinese technology in it that can do just that. And so, those are the kinds of things that we're having to address at my level, and we're doing it. So, I don't know. There's more to it on the DoD side.
Yeah.
But that's more Mike Rogers kind of question, the chairman of HASC. But having served in the military, having a son who now commands at Fort Campbell, that is a critical issue, and we have to ferret it out. And I do think the current administration is a dog on a bone on that.
Mm-hmm. These are great questions. First of all, keep them coming, everybody. These are really, really good ones. There's a lot of similarities in a lot of this stuff. You talked about creating a fund to help businesses impacted by ransomware attacks rebuild their systems. How do you help the people who have already already had their data stolen from these businesses and these attacks? Is there any retroactivity? Is there any way to kind of help those? Is that tough?
Well, first off, that I was using that. Let me make sure I clarify the impression of my presentation of that. That is a considered option. We're not We're not creating a fund tomorrow to address this, right? I'm doing my military background courses of action brief, right? So what are the potential courses of action to address this particular problem? And one could be to make it illegal for an American company or an American person to pay a ransomware attack as a means of completely interrupting that economic model, right? But that wasn't your question. Your question was about retroactively addressing data breaches. I have LifeLock, and they tell me all the time about my X and Y on the dark web. I get my little alert. Well, shit, nothing I can do about that now. I mean, I don't know what I don't know what you do to go back and protect someone. I guess we could put a random number generator and change everybody's. We had these radios when I first came into the Army that had no security to them whatsoever. The Prick 77. This is a Vietnam era thing. I came in the Army in '82, right? I started West Point at '82. That was 7 years after the fall of Vietnam. So the equipment was still, Vietnam stuff. So they innovate this radio that hops frequencies, right? It hops frequencies. So, if you're trying to listen in, Singar's radio, it's changing frequencies constantly. Well, maybe what we do is we do that with Social Security numbers. Somebody smart enough out there to figure that out so that my Social Security number changes every other day and I have a key somewhere, and maybe that does it. I don't know, but it's on the dark web. It's on the dark web.
Yeah. Good question, in response to a lot of the comments you've made here. What are your thoughts on who should defend U.S. sovereign cyber border, the U.S. sovereign cyber border, the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security? The preponderance of capable cyber maneuverable forces reside currently in the DoD. Do you have any thoughts on that, Congressman?
No, I think we work together. We have all these task forces that address cyber attacks. CISA sits as a very powerful organization and with a lot of capability, and it's a nascent organization. The organization led by the esteemed General Nakasone has been around for a little longer, if I understand it correctly. We have to develop CISA. We have to, I think, protect it, focus it on its core mission, and then those two have to work in tandem. But the FBI has a piece in this when there's a cyber attack, particularly if it's a criminal. So it's all about the task forces. Interestingly enough, a Tennessee congressman who now sits on my committee, Congressman Ogles, has a great bill that actually will help strengthen those task forces to work together for the defense of the cyber border. But I think that question is coming from my comments that were about it's time for America's political leaders to accept the fact that our private industry cannot protect themselves against a cyber attack from a nation state. And that means we need to start with a policy that says if you hit us, we're going to hit you back. Mm-hmm. And we might reserve the right to go kinetic. But we need a disincentive for what's happening right now, and we don't have one. And so I've drifted off the intent of your question, but the task forces, that's how I think it should be done when it's a cyber attack against the homeland.
You mentioned Fort Campbell, which, by the way, is, we share Congressman with you. That's the interesting thing, and since the lines were redrawn, is that Fort Campbell and the wonderful people up there in the same congressional district were represented by you, which is symbolic of the great partnership. A lot of our researchers have initiatives with Fort Campbell, Pathfinder, and all that.
I meant to talk about this in my comments, and I forgot. What your business school is doing, to build solutions, and other parts of the university are doing to build solutions to problems that soldiers identify at Fort Campbell, this cooperation that's going on, I don't know, maybe we need to move Futures Command here too, Chancellor. But look, I mean, Nashville, Austin, That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this school, what it's doing, just phenomenal. I mean, empowering our warfighters to solve just small problems, big problems. It's fantastic. But you ask your question, Nate.
Yeah. Well, how can we expand those type of research opportunities and what, you know, from our standpoint as a top research university, we're seeing the federal government reevaluate, you know, just what are the research initiatives and doing kind of a broad review of that. Is it your concern that we kind of lose our focus on these research initiatives, not only the ones that we have at Fort Campbell, but the ones that maybe other universities have? And if not, how do we expand what we're already doing now? Because it's a win-win for everybody.
You know, my advice would be Palmer Luckey. Do you know who that is? I bet there's some people in the room who know who Palmer Luckey is.
I think I know Palmer's.
Andrew,
right?
Okay, so before that, Oculus. So he's totally reinventing the whole military-industrial complex by saying, we're not waiting for an RFP, right? We're going to build all the great ideas that we can come up with, and we're going to set them in front of the military guys and say, wouldn't this be cool? And to do that, you have to see how the military's domain warfare structured, the doctrine, all that stuff. So you have to be really into the system and knowing what's going on and how we're fighting and thinking yourself. Before the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps or the Space Corps or the Guardians ask for it, you got the idea to the solution. Mm-hmm. So from a research standpoint, I would say you're already at the tip of the spear at Fort Campbell, right? Get beyond that. What is the next problem that the military guys are going to face? And can we be doing the research that gets the solution before they even ask for it? Be the Palmer Luckey of research, you know.
Here's a really good question. This is, how concerned are you with China's widespread hacking and pre-positioning on U.S. critical infrastructure by Volt Typhoon, and has already essentially succeeded in deterring the U.S. from defending Taiwan? Has that already essentially succeeded in deterring the U.S. from defending Taiwan?
Okay, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. I think there are two issues with with military, and it's the will and it's the capability, right? So you have to have the willpower to do it and the capability to do it. And sometimes you can have all the capability in the world if you don't have the willpower, right? You can't create deterrence or you can't create an action to go and defend someone. Well, I would submit to you now that China is looking at the current leadership of the United States and the capability of the United States and going, we ain't messing with that guy. Now, that doesn't mean they won't, but I'm telling you that's a huge shift from where we were. Would we defend Taiwan? I mean, I think it's in the position that I sit right now, it is the most important thing for me to say to answer that question is absolutely yes. And do we have the capability? Absolutely yes. And would it be hard and extremely costly? Absolutely yes. But sitting where I sit today, the only way I can answer that question is we will defend Taiwan and we will win.
Another great question here. Has the stand down of the FBI foreign malign, I should have brought my readers up here, foreign malign task force and reduction of CISA's work to counter foreign election disinformation weaken U.S. defenses against foreign malign influence? Or was the refocus wise and our defenses still strong enough?
So I think, if I heard you correctly, you asked if our efforts to ensure foreign governments' elections were legitimate.
The
And removing that is bad for our national security in some way.
It says the question is the reduction of CISA's work to counter foreign election disinformation, weaken U.S. defenses against foreign malign influence, or was the refocus wise, and are defenses still strong enough?
We want CISA focused on protecting our infrastructure, right? That's what it was formed for. That's what it needs to be focused on. This disinformation campaign puts the federal government in a place of deciding what is and isn't justifiable speech. And I, as a freedom-loving federalist, don't like that. Now, were foreign actors and bots and all this stuff involved? Yes. Is there something that we could do to block that? Yes. Should we? Yes. Leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Time to talk about reconciliation, I guess, right? Great questions, everybody. Keep them coming. These are really good. The UK, this is a question from I think from one of our international partners and guests. The UK National Cybersecurity Center, along with CISA, has a policy of encouraging secure by design in companies building tech systems. Do you have views on how we can do more to prevent companies building systems that still include fundamentally basic vulnerabilities? You referenced this just a little bit. And what do you think about penalties for companies found to have basic vulnerabilities in systems they build?
So we're in the course of action development on how to address this particular issue. We're back to that economic model question of how do we confront the first to market economic model? And the challenge there is that you can over-regulate in that space and stifle innovation and disrupt a free market, right? So we have to build courses of action to address this issue that incentivize. I'm a carrot guy, not a stick guy. So are there certifications, for example, that we could have, this company does X, Y, and Z to make sure there are no vulnerabilities, and therefore they get the highest level certificate. And as the consumer beware looks to make a purchase, they can purchase somebody who at least someone has accredited as a superstar. That's a course of action. That's not the decided course of action. But we're developing all of these ideas on how do we address the first to market without interrupting free markets, being overbearing, and stifling innovation. So this one's hard, and honestly, I'm asking for your help on this one. So my email address is on the website. It's easy to find. And as I said, all my other stuff's on the dark web, so you can find me pretty damn easily.
I'm sure we have some talented people in the room that have already attached that information.
Oh, darn it. I meant to delete that photo.
Right, that's right. One final question, and then what words of advice would you give our graduates who wanted to get into national security work?
I'll just say this, you just never know. And I'll put it to you like this. If you're a student and you're here and you're in the cybersecurity space or in this national defense space, you just never know. As the old Dr. Seuss, the places you will go. And so you've been gifted with the ability to get into Vanderbilt University. Make yourself an expert at every single thing you can possibly, because someday you just might be called on to be the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security. And I hope you do a better job than I'm doing. Okay? When I was on the plane at West Point, I never imagined that standing next to me was a future Secretary of State, a future CIA director, a future Secretary of the Defense, CEO of 7-Eleven, CEO of Mercedes-Benz, the head of the Army Corps of Engineers, the second in command of the United States Army, CEO of all these different companies, the Falcons, right? You never know where you're going to go and what challenges you'll face. So, build the foundation now in a place that has incredible opportunity. Don't squander it. Don't squander it. It's a gift because of your hard work to get here. Learn every single thing you can because you never know where you'll be someday.
One final question. I know you're working behind the scenes. Are you going to get the Army-Navy game to Nashville?
Ralph, where's Ralph? I think he's in the room. We're doing everything we can to make that happen. Cadets and midshipmen walking up and down Broadway would be a beautiful sight.
That'd be fantastic.
As Army beats Navy, hopefully in Nashville.
Thank you, Congressman, for the time and for being here and for the leadership that you provide. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Mark Green.
Thank you, guys.